Welcome to the Land to Lots podcast, powered by Launch Development Finance Advisors. And now your host, Carter Froelich.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Land to Lots podcast. It's great to be before you again here today. And today I've got the great pleasure of welcoming to the podcast Carson Bise. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Carson, Carson is the president of TischlerBise. And TischlerBise is one of the top leading fiscal and economic and infrastructure financing consulting firms in the U.S. They work a lot with the public sector in matters of development impact fees. And that is going to be the topic of today's podcast, impact fees. Carson, welcome to the stage. Good to see you.
Thank you, Carter. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's been a while, since we had a chance to chat. So
I think it's probably been 5 or 6 years since our last dinner together.
Yes, and Carson, do you want to talk about what our dinners
pre-COVID? It was pre-COVID.
Yeah, pre-COVID, yeah.
And it was, I think it was in Phoenix at the steakhouse across from that Biltmore area.
Yeah.
It was at
was it Ruth Chris or did we go to Steak 44? I can't remember.
Well, I've been to Steak. Oh, we did do Steak 44.
Yeah, Steak 44.
That's right. I'm thinking about the time prior to that.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
And I really like that Ocean 44 also.
Exactly. Yeah. So Carson and I are making a pitch for the Mastro Steakhouse on this podcast, but we have Carson and I have known each other for a very, very long time, and we're going to get into that, Carson. But before we jump into the podcast, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, and then how you got into the whole realm of impact fees? We'll focus on that today, and because they don't teach us stuff in school.
They don't, exactly. So a little bit about me and how I fell into this. It's kind of a cool story, in my opinion. I went to school in Tennessee at East Tennessee State and got an undergraduate degree in geography with a concentration in urban planning, and went to work immediately. Did not go to graduate school initially, and my first job was in 1990 in Frederick County, Virginia. And Virginia had just passed proffer legislation. And for those of you who are familiar with Virginia, they've got a very unique system of what's known as conditional zoning or proffers, which are basically voluntary impact fees. Some joke in the Commonwealth of Virginia that it's legalized blackmail. But my first week, my job, I was told by the director that I'm going to be the one that's going to be in control of the proffer model. And so I sat on an interview panel my second week of my first job, and it actually interviewed Paul Tischler, whose firm I now own. We became partners. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, that's some interesting work. And I knew I was going to go to graduate school, and I didn't think that getting a master's degree in urban planning made sense if I already had an undergraduate in geography. And interestingly enough, we did not hire Paul Tischler. We hired Hammer Seiler George, which was a competing firm that's now no longer in business in Silver Spring, Maryland. And in my subsequent graduate education, I concentrated in economics. I had a master's in business administration with a concentration in economics. And in my next two public sector jobs in Virginia, they were focused on proffers and infrastructure finance as well as economic development. And then in 1996, Paul Tischler had an opening, and I applied, and he remembered me and became an employee, and the rest is history. So
well, we wanted to just should we riff a little bit about how you and I came to know one another?
Sure.
And so obviously in my previous firm, we looked a lot at development impact fee studies prepared by others. And, being the recovering accountant, we typically just audited these things, pursuant to industry standards and case law. And Carson and I became close acquaintances as we debated various approaches on development impact fees. And so we've been doing this together for how many years? 20 years at least?
Yes,
if not more.
At least 25 that first came across each other. And I think we also had we crossed paths a few times at the old National Impact Fee Roundtable, which became
Yep.
known as the Growth and Infrastructure Consortium, which is now somewhat defunct. But I certainly enjoyed our debates. I mean, a lot of times there was a lot of common ground found, and then there were a lot of times where we probably just agreed to disagree,
Yep.
and we moved on. But
Yep.
not only the work that you did through your current firm and your previous firm always made the studies better, the process better,
Yep.
and we've always been big advocates of public outreach with our clients because you want to make you don't want to have a forum where you're debating whether impact fees are good or bad, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
we're just not going to. Sometimes you're just not going to agree on the concept of impact fees and who should pay. But I think the home building community wants to make sure that the process is transparent and the assumptions are realistic, and jurisdictions aren't feathering their nests, so to speak, in terms of the standards for which they're trying to build infrastructure. Like for instance, building a Taj Mahal park when your standard is, a Quonset hut, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And we've certainly seen that before. And as you have too, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Carson, the one thing that I've really enjoyed is that we have been able to come, we've agreed to disagree in some cases, and we
Just
do what
recently in
consultants
Tucson.
want us to do, put forth the data, make the argument, and then follow. But your firm has done such a great job and continues to do such a great job, and we feel at the end of the day, at least as a representing the private sector, that if we ever have the opportunity to recommend a firm, your firm is top of the list because you do
Thank you
such
for
a
that.
great job. Fair and equitable. So well, let's jump into the impact fees. From where you sit, Carson, in working with the public sector, where are we right now, 2025, as we're recording this, in the world of development impact fees? Let's just start really high level,
Okay,
and then we'll drill
good
down.
question. Good question. And I've always said that if you got 5 impact fee consultants in a room, you'd get 5 different opinions on things.
Yeah.
Because we've all got our own mousetrap and our own, ways of doing things. But I do think that there could be some agreement by those 5 consultants if we were in a room on some of what I'm about to say. I think that from my experience, uh, from 2000 to the Great Recession, there was a huge increase in our business, and that's because a lot of jurisdictions were you know experiencing housing booms, particularly as the economy changed after the tech blow up in early 2000 2001, and the housing market seemed to people just seemed to start putting their money into the housing market. And so our business almost tripled over like an 8-year period in terms of impact fees, and the amount of jurisdictions that were contacting us, went from, the kind of jurisdictions you would expect that would contact you to ones who had no business doing impact fees, but wanted to do them anyway, right?
Yeah.
And so then the Great Recession hit, and, the bottom fell out of the housing market, and it certainly impacted our firm. I mean, our revenue went down like 75% overnight. I'm sure, firms like yours were hit hard from that as well.
Sure.
And as we came out of the recession, the impact fee world for us was a slow but steady increase. And it's only been probably in the last 4 or 5 years that we've been back to where we were in terms of the interest impact fees by jurisdictions, around the country. And, and I think as a lot of these unfunded mandates continue to shake down to the local level, that's increasing the amount of jurisdictions that want to, have impact fees if they don't already have impact fees.
Yeah.
And then we had, the whole thing over the last 2 years or 3 years with the ARPA funding, where that changed the landscape a little bit, where all the, these jurisdictions that, 5 years ago, you would have never counted on the federal government giving them as much money. That changed their impact fee programs, where we were working with jurisdictions where, we were recommending, particularly, for some smaller jurisdictions, that, you need to do away with your utility impact fees because you've got all this ARPA money that you're going to use for all these capacity related things. And so, that certainly impacted the landscape. And in terms of the future, I mean, I think there's a lot of uncertainty. I don't think that impact fees are going away by any stretch of the
No.
imagination, but I do think there are lots of efforts in various states to curb or put limits on impact fees. And
Yep.
we've seen the recent Sheets case at the Supreme Court, which I'm assuming we're going to talk about at some
Yep.
point today. You've got new legislation in Montana, which is known as, I think they're calling it the Montana Miracle, which they're putting restrictions on impact fees and other building regulations. You've got SB 180 in Florida that the home builders are starting to threaten jurisdictions in Florida about these rapid impact fee increases. And Florida had already 4 years ago put limitations in place where jurisdictions couldn't increase, or if they increased impact fees less than 25%, they had to do it in 2 equal increments. And if they were over 25% to 50%, they had to do it over a 4-year period in 4 equal increments. And you had to go through a very special process called extraordinary circumstances to increase them more than 50%, right? And now this SB 180 is taking aim at that and other impact fees limitations. And other things that are compounding the landscape from my perspective is, we're not working anywhere in the United States where affordable housing isn't a huge issue. And
huge.
And there's been lots of studies, as you've seen, about the impact of impact fees on affordable housing, as along with all the other fees and permits and that sort of thing. And so it's an interesting future, and it seems like I hope this doesn't come across as a cheap shot, but in these stakeholder meetings we're involved in, it seems like it's the home building community that always expects the local government to be the one to take the haircut. And you've got to understand that if you're in the widget business and you're losing dollars on every widget you produce, you're not going to be in the widget business, or you're going to have to scale back. And so all of this has to be balanced, right? You got to fund the infrastructure. You got to keep things affordable, and I think that there needs to be an honest dialogue as part of these these stakeholder processes. So anyway, that's my take.
And I 100% agree with that. And there's so much to unpack there, and we're gonna dive into some of that. But I don't see anything changing. Going forward, it's going to get more complicated, more divisive, more than likely, because not only do we have the whole. I mean, there's politics. It seems like a lot of the stakeholders, city councils, et cetera, don't want to increase property taxes. But yet, we got to pay for the infrastructure one way, the private sector putting it in. Maybe there's bond elections on the public side, but clearly it was what we're talking about here today is impact fees. And then who's going to maintain it?
Right.
And we got to pay for that. And where is that money coming from? So I agree. There has to be some real honest conversations, because only by having an honest conversation between the public sector and the private sector are we going to be able to make progress on these really complicated issues.
Right.
And I think everything has to be and I know you feel the same way, fairness and equity. And if we can agree on that, that's going to get us a long way down the road.
Right. And one of the requirements of the South Carolina Impact Fee Act, which is unique, the only one in the country like this, it requires an analysis of the effect of the fee on the availability of affordable housing. And it doesn't give you any sort of guidance on what affordable housing is or any amelioration. If you find that it does exceed some percentage, it just says you have to do this. So there's a lot of controversy about it. But one of the takeaways has been we've sort of used that in other states to have that honest discussion, because I can't tell you how many stakeholder meetings I've been in where somebody from the chamber or somebody from the HBA will say that, well, every $1,000 increase in the impact fee prices, some extraordinary amount of people out of the market. And you say, really, $1,000 is $7.50 on the mortgage? Not to be flippant, but you've got to put it. They make it sound like that the $1,000 is this huge impact. And so and when you get 1,000 plus 1,000 plus 1,000 plus 1,000 and then building permit fees and everything else, it all adds up, right?
Right.
But it's having these types of discussions and showing data to support the assertions that not only the public sector have in these meetings, but also the private sector.
Well, the craziness, and maybe we can divert a little bit from the affordable. I know if and backing up, our firm gets paid to increase impact fees for land developers, and it gets paid to reduce impact fees for the home builders. So I'm on both sides.
Right.
And the biggest issue is that even with the large master plans, I mean, the biggest one we're working on right now is close to 50,000 acres. I mean, we are building a huge city, and we have all the special districts financing infrastructure that we can, but it's still not enough. And we have to go in and we need to increase impact fees to pay for the infrastructure that's not being financed through the special districts.
Right.
So we're setting up special service areas to do that. So we would be, kind of working with you in the jurisdiction saying, hey, we need more impact fees for the home builders. Yeah, we're just looking at fairness and equity. And kind of the craziest thing is California, where they have impact fees to pay for affordable housing,
right,
which makes it even
less
more unaffordable.
Right.
And maybe if we could just build more lots in California, supply and demand would help that issue of imbalance.
Yeah. I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about the politicos, or a lot of jurisdictions not wanting to raise property taxes. And, the other side of our business is the fiscal and economic impact analysis. And so a lot of times we get accused by the home builders of being anti-home builders because so many of our analyses show that, large residential subdivisions and a lot of particularly low density don't always pencil out. And a lot of times there's reasons for that, right? Because, the revenue structures are different from state to state, and they favor certain land uses over others. And every community is going to have contributors and recipients from a fiscal perspective. But, but we're pretty honest in these discussions with the local government when we say, well, why would you expect growth to pay for itself if you haven't raised your property tax rate in 18 years? Right?
Yeah.
Why would you expect it to pay?
Yeah. And they think transaction privilege taxes are going to bail them out. Never does. At some point, we hired you to be a leader, lead. And it's not always a popularity contest.
Right.
And so I think, we agree with that. And, we'll put politics aside. So when you're having a conversation, we've touched on this a little bit already, Carson, but what are the three biggest challenges that you see jurisdictions facing right now as it relates to the provision of public infrastructure?
Great question.
So, I mean, that's a really broad question. A lot of different places, we could dig into that conversation.
Yeah.
But I'm really broad.
The first one is what we were just talking about, and that is unfunded mandates and the lack of courage, to use, I think, your word, to raise taxes. We were elected to be a steward. And then you've got states like Montana and Idaho that have property tax limitations. Colorado has property tax limitations. And so, the cost of infrastructure, the cost of maintenance, the cost of operations is increasing much quicker than or much more than you're allowed to increase property tax. So that's issue number one from my perspective.
Yeah.
And I think issue number two is being hamstrung by issue number one, and that is the service level expectations of new residents, particularly as folks from blue states flee and go to red states, or even before that trend happened, 10 years ago, you'd have, all of a sudden, a big a chip manufacturer locates in a community, and then another community gets all the housing from it, right? And these residents are moving from other jurisdictions, and they're expecting 5-minute response times, and they're expecting a high level of service for parks. And so, that just sort of piles on top of an already strained budget situation. And I think the third thing is, I think jurisdictions are going to have a hard time weaning themselves off this ARPA money.
Yeah, and you want to explain what that is? You use that term. I want to make sure
Yeah, and
our listeners are familiar with that term.
I may have to Google it. It stands for American Recovery. I don't know what the PA stands for.
It's okay,
But
but
it came out of the COVID
yeah,
legislation, the
yep,
federal government, for jurisdictions to respond to COVID, and it's part of that. So it's basically federal funds,
yeah,
kind of. It sort of reminds me. I mean, obviously this was before my time, but I certainly know it from planning history. But federal government was a big funder of infrastructure in the 70s
yeah,
through UDAG and other grants and things like that, and that was one of the reasons impact fees became so popular in the 80s, was because federal government stopped funding infrastructure the way
yeah.
it had in the 60s
Mm-hmm.
and 70s. And so these local governments have had so much of this federal money the last 2 or 3 years that they've kind of gotten used to it, right?
Yeah,
And in fact, we're working in 3 or 4 jurisdictions right now, 2 of them in Rhode Island, where our studies are being funded through the ARPA money.
yeah,
So I think that's going to be a particular challenge. It reminds me of during the Clinton administration in our fiscal work. There were all these COPS grants for local police, and so
mm-hmm.
it created this artificial level of service because
Yeah,
you were getting this federal funding, and then once it went away, the jurisdiction was responsible for funding those police officers, and that was a
yeah,
big nut to have to cover, right?
yeah.
So I think that's the third immediate challenge I see.
So yeah, boy, I mean, there's a lot there too that we could talk about, and as we solely represent the private sector, I believe there is the general consensus that absolutely new growth needs to pay for itself. So then the question becomes, what is that level of service? And that's the biggest issue that we continually run across. I mean, there's other little things that we can talk about, but I think it's really levels of service.
Yeah.
What we always are looking at is, well, what is the existing level of service that's currently being provided? That's what we should pay for. I mean, to make it real simple, many times the city will say, well, our vision is that we want to have a higher level of service. And we say, okay, well, that's great. How are you going to pay for existing residents to get up to that new level of service? What does that cost, and how are you going to fund it? We're happy to pay for it, provided you can demonstrate that you're actually going to pay for it. And then many times in my experience, and we've been on some of these, I mean, on the same cities forever, they'll say, well, we're going to have a bond election. And then they never have the bond election, or the bond election is not successful, but we're paying for a level of service that is higher than what it should be, on the expectation that they're going to be able to lift all boats to that level of service.
Right.
So, and with that, what is what is that conversation like as it relates to levels of service and requesting the private sector to pay for a higher level of service? I'm just curious. I mean, this is in the ballpark. We're just going to be honest and throw it out there, and because I think we all want to solve it. It's just, how do we solve it, with fairness and equity?
All right. Yeah, great question. And for your millions of listeners, I will just say that
Tens of millions, Carson.
Tens of millions. So, one of the premises of impact fees is we can't use them to correct existing deficiencies, which is where we're going with this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I think we tend to be conservative, and I'm not a big fan of the plan-based approach, because you've always got to identify, in most cases, a growth versus non-growth share, because a lot of times the jurisdiction doesn't have a revenue source that they can use to backfill to bring, as you said, everybody that's there today up to this desired level of service, right? And we like to see, one, that you have a dedicated revenue source, right? A lot of jurisdictions will go to the voters and pass a sales taxes dedicated to transportation or for parks. And if you can leverage that, right, and that's a big if, you could justify charging an impact fee based on this desired level of service because you're going to correct the existing deficiency with the sales tax. You're going to bond that sales tax or bond that property tax. But to your point, a lot of times it becomes a house of cards. And that's what we try to educate folks on, right? Is that one, by collecting that first dollar of impact fee, that's you basically entered into a contract with the development community that you're going to provide this, right? And what happens in reality is a lot of times once you get to the political process, the fee gets reduced. So by definition, you're already not collecting enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's why, with jurisdictions that even in cases where they do have, they say they are going to the voters or they do have a dedicated, revenue source, we'll still stick with the consumption-based approach and say, in the consumption-based approach, basically for the listeners, identifies what your current level of service is. It doesn't make a qualitative assessment, whether it's good, bad, different. It is what it is, right? And so let's just say, to use your example, this aspirational level of service is 5 acres per thousand for park acres, where you're currently at 4. That consumption-based approach, the impact fee is going to be based on that 4 acres per thousand. Now you can build to the 5, but you're just going to have to come up with other money. And so we try to hedge that bet to keep them out of court and to keep them from being challenged. But it is a real concern.
And I think the thing that's that we continually run across is I think everybody is comfortable, and when I say everybody, our clients, here's the existing levels of service. We've been able to demonstrate that through inventories, through the reports. And coming from my background in public accounting and doing auditing for 2 years and 2 months, too long, as I like to say, we just go through, okay, is this what they've got? And then how did they cost it out? Are they reasonable? Okay, this is the level of service. And we will go back to our clients saying, yes, it appears that the jurisdiction's listing and their analysis of existing levels of service is correct, and we don't see any issues with it. And it's really easy for us to go back to our clients and say, it looks fine. It is what it is at this point, as opposed to what it could be, and getting into what you just alluded to, the aspirational vision of what this community could be.
Right. And even, and to your point, even with the consumption-based approach, you still have to guard against that because, and that's one of the valuable inputs that the stakeholder groups can add. And I'll give you an example of this in a second. But, let's just say we're sticking with this current level of service at the 4 acres per thousand. But one of the components in that park fee is going to be the cost to construct new amenities, whether it's tennis courts, basketball courts, baseball fields, et cetera. And where a consultant has to do their due diligence is to make sure that when we cost the replacement cost of, let's say, a baseball field, that they're giving you the replacement cost that's based on lights, bleachers, concession stand, when they have none of that now. Every one of their baseball fields is basically just a backstop with some grass and a diamond, right? So that's an increase in the level of service where you're saying, hey, our replacement cost is a Cadillac, but we're providing a Chevy, right? So the same thing can happen even when you're not doing a plan-based approach.
And tell me about replacement costs. Is it depreciated book? Is it depreciated replacement? What is your view on that?
Well, you and I have disagreed on that. Most recently,
we have.
In Tucson. And our perspective is it's the cost to replace in today's dollars. If you were going, for instance, if you have to buy a new ladder truck and it costs $1 million, it costs $1 million. You shouldn't use the depreciated value. And my argument for why you would do that is that if we were going to use a plan-based approach, we would be using the $1 million for the new piece of apparatus, or the $500,000 for the lit baseball field, not the depreciated value.
And my argument to that, will make it to the audience, which consists of tens of millions, Carson, is that, okay, the existing levels of service is not a new ball diamond, okay, it's a So therefore, we can use the replacement cost, but then it should be booked. And here again, this is a continual argument. We're never gonna resolve. It's just different ways of looking at the world. But I appreciate the conversation and the debate that we have.
But I wanted to give you one example of that discussion, and that was it was in Castle Rock, Colorado, about 15 years ago, where we were given a value for what it costs to replace a pool, based on the kind of pool that they have.
Yeah.
And the home builders basically said, well, we'll build that pool for you at that price.
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly.
They were able to give us, hey, we got like three packages from three different projects that said, we built a pool as part of this homeowners association for this, right?
Yeah.
And so we, as a result of that, they provided information that helped the impact fee study, and the cost for the pool got reduced, right?
And the greatest boon to our business has been Google Earth and Google Maps, because we're able to your point, Carson, and we've done this, and you mentioned some of the same projects we've worked on, but we're able to go and show a picture of your existing fire station, which is a Quonset hut. But meanwhile, the fire chief wants to build a $25 million facility, with a workout room and an espresso machine, and we're able to say, well, here's your existing levels of service, which is a steel building, kind of thing, and we'll pay for that kind of thing. And but that's a level of detail to our listeners that we get into, and here again, we do our best to steer our clients to get to that point of fairness and equity. And to that end, we've touched on a little bit how could the public and private sectors work more collaboratively to come together with a number as it relates to an impact fee that maybe each party isn't really comfortable with, which generally leads me, that's probably a good deal. If the public sector is not happy and the private sector is not happy, it's probably pretty fair.
Right.
And I'm using that, as a general statement.
I mean, that's a difficult question. And I mean, I think the thing I would come back to, and I'm going to steal this. Oh, sorry, my ringer's on.
Yeah.
I'm going to steal this term from the city of Buckeye, Arizona, where I think you've done some work in Buckeye as well. But they use the term development partners.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that more communities need to sort of embrace this concept of this is a partnership. Most of these developers are going to be in your community for years to come. Right. And, Buckeye hosts like a monthly development partners meeting where there are all sorts of things on the agenda, not only impact fees, all sorts of issues. And I'd like to see more communities embrace that concept of, this is a partnership and, we're in this together. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the first step. What else? I mean, I think we're already seeing, more public-private partnerships in terms of, developing infrastructure. I mean, I think that's one way that we can work together. And I think that, the development community can be less litigious.
Yeah. That's a big part of our business, though, Carson.
Right.
Just kidding.
But I think really. But the point is if you go to point one, which is embracing this development partner concept, by definition, things are going to become less litigious.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and to that end, as it relates to the NHB, they have, we've done a lot of litigation for the NHB and the BIAs around the country, and one of which that they list on their website was a community in the Southwest. And we happened to do the development impact fee review that spurred this entire lawsuit. But even as part of our initial findings, we went to the jurisdiction and said, there are some serious challenges with this that we see. We don't think that this is fair and equitable, and this is why. And we would really ask that you consider reversing your position on this issue. And they decided not to for whatever reasons, and which ultimately led to a very, very, very long lawsuit. But I mean, to your point of working together, we like to try to work together as well, with the public and private sector. My experience has been when we go in to look at a development impact fee study, we tell our home builder clients, and most of the time we're working for the BIAs, is that we will find issues that raise impact fees. We will find issues that lower impact fees. We will write both. We're going to just tell you our findings. We're not both good and bad as it relates to your position. But we're reviewing this based on industry standards, case law, those kind of things. Our experience has been that the jurisdictions, when we provide our findings to the jurisdiction, that generally they want to pick the things that increase impact fees and debate the things that don't. And that's been my experience. And some of those we worked on together, some of which we hadn't, but that's my experience. But I agree, we can work. I like the whole idea of development partners working together to create the vision of the community that it will benefit all, the residents and the builders for that matter.
Right. And
So go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think it is important to note that there are several state impact fee acts, specifically Idaho and Montana, that that say that you have to establish a impact fee advisory committee, and both of those, both those acts actually prescribe what backgrounds they need to be comprised of: a developer, an accountant, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes, I mean, it's good that it prescribes that, but in our experience, it needs to be a more inclusive group. And like, for instance, we've done fees for several fee studies for the city of Missoula, Montana. And usually when we're out those impact fee advisory committees, we do that meeting, but we also do a public forum that a larger subset of the development community can come out and get their impact or their input as well.
Yeah. It's been a while since I think the last one I did was in Bozeman, but that was a number of years ago that on the fire fees, this kind of thing. Jumping in, we touched on some of the Supreme Court cases. You mentioned Sheets versus El Dorado County, which has recently come out that basically said whether it's a legislative enacted fee, still have to adhere to the rough proportionality, the Nolan Dolan, all of that kind of the case law related to impact fees. What do you see, or have you seen any impact of Sheets versus El Dorado in your travels around the country?
Yeah. So, I mean, and since we first scheduled this, Sheets is, in my opinion, is now less important, because since we scheduled this podcast, and I should add that the Supreme Court basically remanded the decision, or remanded it back to the California Supreme Court.
Right.
And the California Supreme Court just upheld El Dorado County's position. But there has been considerable, murkiness, or, questions about, well, what does this mean for impact fees? And in fact, I was on a panel in Arizona at the State Planning Conference last September that addressed this, and we had three different perspectives. One practitioner who was primarily an academic thought the sky was falling, and that it was going to forever change the landscape for impact fees. And myself and the land use attorney didn't think it was going to have that much of an impact, because so many of the impact fee acts already have that rough proportionality in the act already, right? And I think that my take at the time was that it will have some impact, and that would be one. The development community knows that Sheets is still out there, or was out there at the time, and would just quote Sheets in their reviews is almost like a threat of, you got to be careful because of Sheets. But I'm hoping that as a result of this, the light that the Sheets shined on the impact fee world in general, is that I hope it will improve methodologies. I think that, initially, because of Sheets, the home builders we're probably going to, depending on the outcome, we're going to press for revisions to the various state impact fee enabling legislation acts in order to tighten those up. I certainly think that there's been an increased scrutiny on the methodologies and particularly service areas. And for your tens of millions of listeners, service area or benefit areas, they're sometimes called, sometimes a jurisdiction, particularly if they're large, particularly counties or large cities, may establish benefit areas where the fees collected stay in that area or can at least be spent in that area and the area adjacent. And the idea here is that, if I live in, the southern portion of a big county and I'm generating impact fees, but you're building all the roads in the north, I haven't received a benefit from that payment. And so I think that the service area scrutiny is good for the impact fee business, because I frankly think that a lot of us included, you kind of get lazy, right? You kind of do things by rote sometimes, right? And it's nice to, to have people checking up on you. And, I think that to your earlier point about plan-based approaches, one of the good things that happened, I think, over this year and a half, where there was all this question about what sheets meant, was there was certainly an increased scrutiny on the growth share calculations, on plant-based approaches, really digging into, what you do in terms of, credits, to what extent are you going to be relying on grants or other revenue sources that
are we double paying?
Exactly. And so one of the things that we do, particularly with parks, where you may have had a history of funding some of your infrastructure with grants, is we'll go back over a 10-year period and see, if you spent $10 million on parks, but $2 million of that came from grants, maybe we should be discounting the fee by 20%, because it's likely you're going to be getting this grant funding in the future.
And that's a whole nother discussion. We'll have to have another podcast, Carson. So the biggest thing that I saw with sheets, and here again we had is it being enacted by the legislative branch or the bureaucracy, if you will. But to me, it was the Supreme Court saying we still had to have rough proportionality, and whether Sheets' $23,000 impact fee was fair or not for him to put up his trailer. And to me, that's the thing I really focused on. And when we interviewed Paul Baird, we kept on talking about who enacted the impact fee. Was it, the legislative, in this case, city, or the county board of supervisors, or the bureaucracy? But to me, it always gets to levels of service. And when you look at AB 1600 in California, it says that the impact fee can pay for existing levels of service or that level of service which is in the general plan, which gets you into this whole quagmire, at least in California, that I've seen since the late 80s, is that just loading up the fees with costs, with stuff that it ain't never going to get built. And never going to get paid for, and that's the big disparity, at least. It gets back to the fairness and equity, and to the fact that the private sector feels like it's getting screwed because these are just made up numbers.
Right.
I mean, in their mind. Okay.
And there's some truth to that. And in fact, we've done quite a bit of impact fee work over time in California, but we generally stay away from California on purpose. Because the expectation is, and I've seen so many fee studies in California, to your point, where they basically just say, here's our 20-year CIP, and we're going to divide it by the increase in growth. And that's a simplistic description, but that's the expectation.
And there's no way to fight it. And so I was focusing with Paul, and it was a different way to looking at it, going, maybe this is the way we need to look at it. Because I think the whole idea, it's just Nolan-Dolan, dual rational nexus test, fair and equitable, which gets back, is it fair and equitable? And I think everybody can agree on fair and equitable. It's just a matter of how does the public and private sector come together to determine what that is. That's a real challenge, I think, right?
It is.
It
is. I mean, it'd be a much easier world if jurisdictions had the money to basically upfront the infrastructure
Yeah.
and the developers pay you back, right? Because
Yeah.
you know what it costs, right?
And,
And there's, to your point, and what we've been talking about this whole podcast is the fact that they're not in this position.
yeah.
And what is the true cost,
Well,
right? If you're having to project going forward.
and that's a really good segue. Man, it's just like you and I planned this thing. So let's talk about special districts. Because the challenge we have with impact fees is we're going out and hey, we think growth is going to occur in here, and we may have a service area, we may not, we may have engineers' cost estimates, we may not, we may have a recent project that was constructed by the jurisdiction, kind of sort of that looks like what's planned over here. But at least with the special districts, be it a CFD in Arizona, California, a CDD in Florida, a MUD, a PID, Metro District, pick your vernacular. We're able to draw a circle around growth and say growth is paying for growth for infrastructure, which directly or indirectly is required to service this project. What is your conversation like as it relates to the use of special districts and how that helps bring funding specifically for that project, usually kind of sort of in advance of growth getting there, in some cases maybe not so much. But do you just want to talk about that and give your position or thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a special district expert. I mean, we don't do it like you guys do. But they certainly have their place, and there's certainly in most cases, very successful. As we know, some have failed, and jurisdictions have to take them over. But from our perspective as practitioners, it's almost like a partnership where there's the city, through the establishment of these districts, are partnering with the development community in order to provide this. But it sort of complicates our life in terms of the types of due diligence and the questions we have to ask, because we got to make sure that we're not double dipping through the impact fee in order to to fund infrastructure that may or may not be funded through the district, and where is that overlap going to occur? And we had to address that. I think you guys, didn't you do something like that in Peoria, in that northern area?
Yep. We're looking at setting up our own service areas and the credits.
Right.
And to your point, what we're seeing is that the cost of infrastructure is so high for these. I mean, it's just so huge that what we did is we were segregating what is going to be paid with the development impact fee, and then what was going to be paid with the community facilities district. The two are not overlapping. They're separate and distinct. So we're able to, over time, get the biggest reimbursement, both through the CFD and through the impact fees, to the developer. And
in some cases, we've seen them where, like, you're using the district to build the utility infrastructure, and maybe that's it. And the impact fees are going to fund other things. But in those cases, sometimes the developers have upfronted those. And they need the development fees to be at particular levels in order to get themselves paid back in a reasonable period of time.
And that's when we go to you and go, Carson, our impact fee isn't high enough.
Well, I'm not going to name the jurisdiction, but about 10 years ago, at the public hearing, one of the council members said something about scrapping the impact fees, and the developer community, you can't do that. We're the ones that needed them to get reimbursed.
They need to get reimbursed for all this. And like I said, it's depending upon who we're working for. The master developers generally want it higher, and the home builders want it lower. And it's just a matter of who's paying for us. Who's paying? Yeah. Carson, as we're getting near the end of our podcast, are there any thoughts that you would like to share with our listening audience? Keeping in mind, most of our listeners are private sector representatives.
Yeah, I mean, I think that so many jurisdictions have forgotten that impact fees are a form of land use regulation, and they just happen to generate revenue, right? And I think that the development community should remind jurisdictions of that fact, because particularly transportation is a type of impact fee that is very malleable to helping a community encourage certain behavior. So, for instance, we work in a lot of suburban jurisdictions that are trying to encourage, mixed use nodes. And, you can make an argument that if, densities are up at a certain scale and you've got connectivity and other forms of transportation, that you're going to have a much higher incidence of, internal trip capture. And so you should qualify for a lower impact fee.
Yeah.
And that can help incentivize certain
Yeah.
types of land use decisions, right? So I would encourage the development community to remind jurisdictions of that. To your point about equity, one of the most important steps in the impact fee process is, I call it storytelling. How you solve the rational nexus or prove rational nexus is you have to make the case through the impact fee study that this jurisdiction has had growth, and that growth is going to continue, and that's done through whatever you call them, the development projections. We call them the land use assumptions, which includes not only the projections of residential, non-residential development, but also the different demand indicators like persons per household, trip generation rates, employment densities, et cetera. And one of the things that, not only our firm, but other firms have been advancing around the country is this idea of progressive residential fee structures, where in most community, unless you've got wonky demographics like a small retirement village in Florida, most communities we work in, there's a relationship between the size of house, the number of people, the number of vehicles available, which influence trip generation rates, and what's different is where that trend starts to level off. Whether in one community it's 3,500 square feet, or in another community it may be 6,000 square feet.
Yeah,
but it improves proportionality, right? Because now smaller homes, which tend to be lower priced, generate fewer people on average. And so their fee is commensurate with their impact and the affordability level. And so it sort of starts to make an impact fee behave like a tax, right? Which a lot of politicos like, particularly in progressive communities. But I also think that as housing affordability and equity becomes this huge issue with jurisdictions around the country, that this is by far a superior impact fee approach. Now, granted, it is a little bit more administratively cumbersome for the jurisdictions.
And then, well, let's talk about it, because we have that argument, or is it based on a per unit, regardless of size, or is it based on square footage? So since COVID and work has really changed, where a lot of people need a designated workspace, maybe two if husband and wife are working together, and now they're cutting down on the amount of trips because they're only going into the office 3 days a week. So you could make it kind of both ways. And I think the key to that, what I heard you say, is at some point, what is that square footage? Where does it stop? Where is there no longer a relationship?
Right. And to your point, an ITE doesn't do, which Institute of Transportation Engineer, your tens of millions of listeners, publishes the trip generation manual. And the one thing it doesn't do a good job of is mixed use. And the situation you're describing now. But I think there's a counter argument to be made that although that the trips originating by the husband and wife that were used to be work trips are now being replaced by the Amazon and DoorDash delivery people.
So we need to have a study on that. Who's studying? And that's probably a good place to end it, Carson.
Okay.
I really appreciate you taking the time.
And
for those listeners that would like to get in touch with Carson Bise and his firm, TischlerBise, and if you're interested in getting this T-shirt, okay, Carson, you want to mail the T-shirt? So reach out to Carson and you can get your I Love Impact Fees T-shirt. And if you have any questions, comments for Carson, please feel free to reach out to him. Carson, thank you again for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Carter. It's my pleasure.
You have been listening to the Land to Lots podcast with Carter Froelich. Follow us wherever you find your podcast to never miss a new episode.